What are some of the challenges you have faced while teaching English to Korean students? And if you have faced any challenges, how did you overcome them?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges that professors and students alike have, especially when it comes to like EFL, English as a foreign language,
Yeah.
is that the students very often, their English language level is very low.
Yeah, right.
And so they feel very uncomfortable speaking in English, and so they really have a hard time expressing themselves to the professor.
Of course.
And even though I can, if they were to speak to me in Korean, I could understand what they were what they were saying to me. But I always try to
Speak English.
Yeah, I want my students always to only converse with me, I should say, in English.
In English.
Yes,
Yeah.
because that's
Just practice?
well, the more that they use it, the more comfortable they become using it. Well, especially for conversation and such. But because I understand my students, they have difficulties, so it takes a lot of patience.
Patience.
For instance, maybe students are they're trying to come up with, all right, what am I going to say?
Yeah.
And so I have to give them time. And so I'll just be quiet while they're
quiet?
while they're
Yeah.
trying. Once in a while, maybe I might give them some suggestion. Maybe they're trying to say this, and
Say something.
then maybe that gives them the idea. Oh yeah, it's something like that. But for the most part, it's just being very, very patient with the students, no matter what their level is. And sometimes you get very low-level students,
right.
and you have to be very, very patient with them. I really don't want to push students too much. I want to push them enough, but not too much. I don't want them to feel uncomfortable about it.
We're really scared of that. Okay, and then next question is that, as far as I know, you got PhD degree in a major of Korean history. So why did you decide to get PhD degree in a major of Korean history?
Okay, well, now Korean history is actually, that is the area that I concentrated on. My whole PhD and also my master's degree were in Korean studies, 한국학.
Korean study, yeah.
So that was the actual department that I did it in. And then below that, my interest is Korean history specifically, and regarding the area of the late Joseon dynasty.
Yeah.
And then I have my really big topic is the 신미양요에, which will I know that we're going to talk about a little bit. So I have been interested. Well, I love history, any history, really.
Oh, really?
Oh, yes.
Oh.
When I first came to Korea back in the 1980s, I was very fascinated with Korea's history because, Korea has a very long history.
Yeah, right.
And there's a lot to learn because it's such a long history. There's a lot to learn, and I've just always had kind of a general interest. And as time went on, and I was different things I became involved with, my interest in Korean history it grew. And especially in a couple of areas specifically, like we were talking about. And then, of course, starting when I was teaching at Handong University, I was asked to teach Korean history.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I was teaching a Korean history class at Handong University in English.
Who?
To the students of Handong.
Okay.
Yeah, and in English. So I was teaching Korean history in English.
Really?
And I did.
Is it possible?
Oh yeah.
Oh, really?
And I was doing that for a couple of years while I was there, and I had really great reactions from the students about that.
Was it hard to teach Korean history
No.
to students?
No, I don't think so. Well, for one thing, if you really enjoy doing something,
Yeah, I know.
it makes
I
it,
definitely
you know,
know. Yeah.
well, and again, as I said, I like to talk, so that was very easy to do. The students were very involved in it. They really enjoyed that and everything. So anyway, I taught it there, and then when I came here to Yeongnam University, I was asked to teach Korean history at the School of International Studies. And that was, actually, that was probably just the year after I arrived here, that just starting right then. I taught for, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years, I taught Korean history and Korean culture also I taught here. To international students.
To international students.
Yeah, probably half of my students were from China, but I had many students. I had students from Europe and Southeast Asia and like that, and I loved it. I just really loved teaching students, and I would still be doing it if I could, but for some reason. It stopped, and then I wasn't. I wasn't teaching it anymore.
Do you have any special teaching way? I mean,
when I was teaching history, the one thing that was always important to me was getting students talking to each other. Also, because you know whatever subject we were talking about, whatever topic was on our agenda for that time period, you know, I would get students
conversation.
Yeah, well, and they would ask me questions. And then they would talk to each other about it. We'd have some small group time talking about whatever it was. And I found that the students were really quite into that. You know, I like to have I like to make it, I guess you could call it living history.
Living history.
So we would talk about things. We would also even. There are times we would even maybe take a field trip. For instance, I would take the students to the university's museum. Or we would go to the folk village, the Minsokcheon, and you know I'd explain about the different structures and everything like that. And students would ask me a lot of questions and like that.
That's good.
Yeah, so it's just you know kind of keeping things really active. But you see, the thing is that here in Korea. Korean history has not always been able to have been taught really well because for one thing, there was a lack of proper books. You see,
really?
all right, China and Japan, they had their books for their countries, and they also had their the areas that they were particularly interested in related to Korea. Like, for instance, you know, China was, you know, their Northeast Project, as they would call that, which, you know, was in a former time, you know, Koreans considered to have been their land, and you know, a lot of ethnic Koreans still live in that area. And of course, there's the problems, for instance, that Korea has with Japan, especially regarding like the island of Dokdo.
Yeah, right.
And the thing is that they have lots of materials in English even to where they are saying their viewpoints on this thing and that thing, and Korea historically has not had really a lot of materials in English that they could explain to the rest of the world. This is what we're about. I mean, there's more now.
Yeah.
But the thing is that when I first started getting really into Korean history, the early to mid 90s, you know, about 30 years ago, there were not many good Korean history books in English.
But nowadays?
Nowadays, there are more because people are seeing that there needs to be more, and so people are writing more. Now, before, a lot of the books were actually translations of books written by the Chinese and the Japanese. So quite often you were getting their viewpoints.
Yeah, right.
And not the Korean viewpoint.
Yeah, right.
And which sometimes was very opposite to the Korean viewpoint. But probably in the last 20 years, there have been more and more that have been written from the Korean viewpoint of things.
Oh, yeah, it's really important.
Well, it's important, but not only the Korean viewpoint, but I would say more, and this is the way that I like to teach, is from a neutral point of view.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I would teach my Korean history classes, it would be from that neutral point of view. As I said, half of my class sometimes was Chinese. So the Chinese students, the international students, and so they would come in with their knowledge from the Chinese viewpoint, and then I'd have many Koreans in my class too, and they had their Korean viewpoint.
Yeah, right.
And so it's like, okay, let's look at the facts here. And so we would listen to both sides' stories.
Oh, it's good.
Well, because they're adults, they're young adults, and they have to weigh both sides of the issues. Right?
Yeah.
And I found that the students very often they would say, "Oh, I never really realized that.
Oh.
Gee, I never heard that before."
Yeah.
And so they can do more research on that subject and themselves, and they can come to their own conclusion about what's what. I never pushed an agenda ever.
Oh.
I never pushed for anything except, all right, these are the facts. Facts are important.
Yeah, facts are important.
Facts are very important.
Yeah.
Because you're asking me about what led me into this.
Yeah, right.
And it's just my love of history.
Yeah.
And just being able to, especially Korean history, and sharing that with people.
Okay, thank you for your detailed answer.
Sure.
And as you mentioned before, 신미양요. So what are some lesser known aspects or events related to 신미양요 that you find particularly intriguing or fascinating?
Wow. I mean, actually, there's so much about it. You see, the 신미양요, that is a part of Korean history that is, for a long time, was very unknown. It was unknown in the West, like in America. It was unknown even here in Korea for the most part. When I talk to my students about it, they know very little because in their history books, it's mentioned, but it's at most maybe a paragraph.
It's too short.
Yeah, basically, as I say to my students, basically I know what their history books say. The Americans came to Korea, the Americans caused trouble, and the Americans went home. It's just basically those three things, and so they're really so much of it was unknown, and the thing is that. There was very little material on the 신미양요. Many of the books that when I first started researching it, which was back in 1995, when I was first researching it, there were very few source materials. And many things I found in later years of my research were just completely wrong. They were completely inaccurate, not true. And then some other things were, they were borrowing from the same small source materials. And there were so many things that were, many people, even to this day, many people think, oh, this is the way it was, but it was very, very different from the way it was. Now, you're asking about if there were, any things that I found particularly intriguing.
Fascinating.
Well, I think probably one of the biggest things would be that the fighting between the United States and Korea really happened because of a huge cultural misunderstanding. You see, before the fighting ever started, the Americans came into Korean waters near the island of Ganghwa-do, and some Korean envoys, the people from the Korean government came to visit the ships, and they want to know, why are you here? What are you doing here? And, well, the Americans were telling them, well, they were saying, well, we're here, and they said we're here in peace, and you know we want to
Yeah.
explore around this area and such for maybe future trade relations or something like
Yeah.
that. And so the Americans said, and this was on May 31st, 1871, the last day of May 1871. And they said, so tomorrow, June 1st, you know, we would like to send a small group of our ships up the, well, I call it the Ganghwa Straits, the Yamha. It's the water between Ganghwa-do and the mainland.
Okay.
And so they wanted to send some small ships up there just to, so they could, on their charts, they could map out all the rocks and everything for future traveling. Well, the Koreans who were there, they were quiet. They didn't say anything. The Americans thought, oh, well, that silence means,
Okay.
no objection. But the thing is that to the Koreans, that meant if we don't give you permission, that means there's no permission.
Yeah.
So the understanding was opposite.
So
the Americans thought, oh, everything's okay. And to the Koreans, it was like, no, we don't agree. You know, you can't go up there. And so the next day, the Americans, thinking that everything is okay, they sent their ships up, and they received cannon fire from both Ganghwa Island and also even from the mainland onto their ships. And the Americans, you know, were very surprised, like, they're firing on us. You know, we had an agreement here. But the Americans were wrong. They had no agreement. And so the Americans fired back on the Koreans. And then they went back to their anchorage where all their other ships were. And then they sent a message to the Korean government. They said, basically, explain yourself. Why did you fire on us?
Yeah.
We expect an apology from you and an explanation. But to the Koreans, it's like, apologize for what? You know, we didn't give you permission. So coming into our waters without permission, you can expect that we would defend ourselves. So, you know, that's why I say that it was a very, very big cultural misunderstanding. You know, if I think that if the Koreans had, the Korean envoys at that time, if they had informed the Americans, no, you may not go up there. You know, if they had said that very directly, you know, the Americans probably would have tried to work something out with them. But I think that if it was like, if you come up there, we are going to fire upon you. So, you know, if they had told them very directly, I think it's possible they might not have. And then they probably would have just stayed maybe around in the area they were and not tried to push their way further into Korean territory. So I think that is one of the things that that was an interesting point, and I think a very important point. But it's one we'll never know what could have been. So instead, you know, it came to fighting with each other, and then the end of that was, America may have won militarily, but they lost diplomatically. So Korea won diplomatically because they never gave in. But America, of course, you know, had for that time, you know, very advanced military arms and everything. So,
Yeah, that's interesting and sounds so, you know, so sad.
Yeah.
So, and let's talk about next question, next topic.